Thank you, Representative Miller. A lot for us to learn from that one. Our third presenter is Matt Meyer, Mayor, who's the president of Buckeye Institute, which is in Ohio. Buckeye does a great job there, and they're part of the state policy network. But what really impressed me about Matt is he came over from the Heritage Foundation, where he's a visiting scholar at Heritage, and in a very short period of time, without much expense at all, they've developed what I think is one of the best, if not the best, transparency websites in the nation. It's incredible. Matt?
Well, thank you. I hope I can live up to that. That's very kind of you, Bob. First, I want to thank the State Policy Network for hosting this. They've been a great friend of ours in Ohio, and I know there are some of my colleagues from Maine Heritage Policy Center. I've got Washington as well as Mackinac doing some good stuff. Have to say shout out to Dr. Vetter. Good to see you, Dr. Vetter. You know, it's funny, on the flight over, I was reading President Reagan's Role of a Lifetime, Lou Cannon's book, and I just hit the part where he's making fun of economists about if you give a bunch of economists a working business, they'll all figure out if it'll work in theory. So it reminded me of you. So here's the problem in Ohio. Let me scope this for you. Like other states, we have an enormous budget deficit projected to be anywhere between $6 and $8 billion, which is bad. What makes it worse is we have a structural job problem in the state of Ohio. For the last 20 years, about 245 months, if you go back to January 1990 to June 2010, Ohio, no kidding, has added a net 127,000 private sector jobs, net, for 11.4 million people. We added about 83,000 jobs at the same time, so pretty close to a 1-to-1 ratio. What that means, obviously, is if you don't have a vibrant private sector, you cannot have a vibrant government. Well, we've had a vibrant government, but we have not had a vibrant private sector, and so we face an enormous deficit. So that puts it all in context. And in the way I try to see things is through the eye of my mom, because, you know, she's just a typical person, doesn't get into the inside baseball stuff, could never find a government website and figure out budget data. It's confusing for her. So I try to put everything into the framework that my mom would say, wow, that's really crazy, or holy, I didn't realize it was that much. So that's kind of the focus we take at Buckeye is make sure that average Joe and Jane Ohio can figure this stuff out pretty easily. And I also got that from my work at Heritage. I made the huge mistake of deciding I was going to figure out what the Homeland Security budget was for every city, county, and state that had an urban area security initiative city, which is the big risk cities. And it ended up being about 127 jurisdictions. It took me 9 months, because I'd start going through, I'd get through 10 budgets, and then I'd hit up the 11th budget, and I'd realize, oh, wait a minute, I didn't peel out federal dollars. So I had to go back to the other ones, and I had to pull out federal dollars. And then I would get through the 20, oh, wait a minute, I've got to pull out now these fees and things, because that's not general revenue, which is what I was trying to focus on. So I realized how complicated these budgets are, that you really have to, get inside the legislature and really know to figure out what's really real in state budgets. And so that's also why we try to keep things simple. And the other thing is we try to focus on what's big. You know, I love when this happens. I love when I fly somewhere and in the paper that day is articles that say, focus on city pay widens. And we're going to have California officials orders web disclosure as the backlash extends beyond Bell. People in California are realizing that public officials, public workers are making a whole lot of money. Not new to some of us, but it is new to a lot of citizens in the country. And so this is a huge issue for people. Now, we went out 2 weeks ago and we did a poll in Ohio, about 1,800 registered voters. When we hired the polling company, they said, all right, we'll go in the field Monday night. We'll try to get 800 to 1,000 registered voters from across the state of Ohio on these 15 questions. They ended up getting 1,800. Got an email the next day. The guy said, you're not going to believe this. People wanted so badly to give their opinion that we ended up getting 1,800 in the same period of time it normally takes us just to get 800 to 1,000. And what that poll said to us on the issues we really care about is when it comes to solving Ohio's budget deficit, 52% of Ohioans want our legislature and our governor to cut government compensation. 52% said that should be their first choice. The next 27% said, and after that, you better cut government programs, and only 16% said raise my taxes. And that applied, and then we gave them a second choice, and the first choice for the second choice was cut programs. Second choice was cut government compensation, and then 16% said raise my taxes. So this is not something that I think legislators or governors are going to be able to duck. They're going to try, and they're trying in Ohio now. We've had a joint budget group that after a year after it was formed finally had its first meeting a couple weeks ago, has now had 3 meetings, and all 3 meetings have focused on let's kick around the can on what the exact number is that the deficit is. And they don't invite people like me in to talk about how do you start solving the problem. They just want to kind of kick it so after the election and then try to solve it. And so what we've tried to do to increase transparency is we built a very user-friendly website, launched it just over 90 days ago, and what we put on there were the searchable data tools, which isn't new. Lots of folks have that. But what we did with it is we did a couple of things. One, we put all state salary for the last 7 years on there. So you can look up any state worker for over the course of time and see what they made every year going forward. So you can actually then figure out, wow, that's a nice raise. Oh, that was a really nice raise, and those types of things. Then we put on every public school teacher in the state of Ohio. So every K-12 public school teacher in the state of Ohio is on that website. So again, that goes back to 2004. So you can now see at the school district level, hey, what are they making? And we also put on school performance data so that you can then match how the school's doing to what we're paying the teachers to start getting that focus on transparency, right? Well, then we also added lobbyist data because we wanted to make sure that lobbyists also were caught in the crosshairs. And then the other piece of it is we added, 2 weeks ago, we added the salary data for all the employees of the Ohio State University. Go Bucks, but they didn't like that. But we added their salary data as well, and we'll be adding postal workers in Ohio in 2 weeks or so, and then we're going to add all the federal workers in Ohio 2 weeks later, and then eventually our goal is we're going to have every local government worker salary on there, cops, firefighters, county, city, I don't care. We're going to have every higher ed institution that's public in Ohio on there, and we'll keep putting the teachers and we'll keep putting the state workers so that there's total transparency. Now, the thing we did that's unique about this is we didn't just put the salary on there and say, here it is, isn't that interesting? What's great about this, and go to the website, www.buckeyeinstitute.org. Do a search, and you could do searches by department, by jobs. You could put in by brackets. You know, I love to do the over 100,000. And so there are 1,799 state workers in 2009 that made over 100,000 in Ohio. And just to give you perspective, 5 years before, there were only 298 workers in Ohio, state workers that made that. So you've had a 517% increase in 5 years of people making 6-figure salaries in the state of Ohio. And what that means is $2.4 billion in liabilities for their pension for just 1,800 of the 60,000 state workers. So what we did is we wanted to make this real for people like my mom. And so you can look up your friends and neighbors and you can see what's on there. And then at the very last column is this little figure that you can go over there, and if you just touch it, it pops up what their pension will be when they retire, what their lifetime pension will be, assuming 18 years of retirement. We put in what their health care costs will be per year, and we put in what the employer's last 3-year contribution will be to their 401 or to their pension. And then, just to give it the proper context, we put in what the maximum Social Security benefit would be for you and me. And people can, and by the way, that's about $28,328 for somebody who makes 6 figures consistently. That's about as high as you can get out of Social Security. To the equivalent, you'd have to have your highest 3 years in Ohio, average $42,891, I think, for you to have a retirement for life of what you can maximum get out of Social Security. So we wanted to put this all into context. And so we've done that, and it's great. Or we also have a pension calculator. You can do the 3-year average on your own, put it in, and it pops out all the information. And then for teachers, we added a wrinkle. We said, well, here's what they would make if they actually worked 2,080 hours based on their prorated numbers, because we got sick of this whole thing of, oh, we're underpaid. So we wanted to show what they make, and you can see that they're making 6 figures if you actually made them work 2,080 hours, which is how the rest of us all work. So we've done that. Well, what happened? So just over 90 days, it's been out there. So here's what happened in just over 90 days. We've had over 70,000 visitors to our website in just over 90 days, which for an SPN think tank is an enormous number, right? Not only did we have that, they spent over 8,000 hours on our website searching, right? Which is great. From 400 Ohio cities. Why is that important? You want to get information in the hands of the people. Look at those numbers. 400 cities across the state of Ohio have been looking at this information consistently day after day, week after week. We also had, remarkably, 86 foreign countries. I'm not sure what they're doing, but we welcome them all the same. They're probably saying, I can't believe how much they make in America. But so we did that. And then the final piece is we looked at how many searches. In just over 90 days, they have done 550,000 searches of the data. 550,000 in 90 days. I can't wait till we get to hit 1 million so we can do a press release so the media can ignore that we hit 1 million, but folks know because it always ends up getting out there. But it's crazy. And when we add the postal workers, they're going to go postal. And we're going to have to start watching our direct mail and all those things because it's going to start getting probably dropped intentionally. We'll get all the bad stuff back, but we won't get any of the good envelopes back. But that's the kind of stuff we're trying to do to drive this into the hands of the voters, because what we found is they get lost in the nitnoids of the specifics and figuring all these things out. But boy, what they get is, just like the welfare debate in the mid-90s, wait, you telling me my neighbor who's a teacher or my neighbor who works for state government, who I see, who leaves after I leave and gets home before I get home is making that much money, and their pension's going to be what? So what we're trying to do is, frankly, create the welfare queen of today, which is public sector workers. And that's just the reality we live in. And I think we're succeeding slowly in Ohio. And the other thing we did to make sure that that was wrapped properly is we then did a report where we took the median state employee and we compared them to their private sector peer. And we did it on a 30-year figure to show that the government worker would cost about $8.8 million over their lifetime compared to the private sector worker that runs at about $4.1 million. So about twice as much for the same nurse, one in government, one outside of government. And we called that the grand bargain is dead, because there's this myth in America still that there's this grand bargain. You work for government, you make less, but you get a decent pension and job security. Well, that's not the case. You make more, you get great health care benefit, you pay a lower percent of that cost that benefit, you get great sick leave, you can bank that for years and years and years. There are people in Ohio, Leo Stacy's my favorite, Leo retired, and Leo cashed out his sick leave. Leo cashed out his sick leave for $68,000, which was 20 grand more than he ever made a year as a state worker, because he could bank years and years of his sick leave. So we not only let him bank it, but we paid him essentially his current rate for something he had earned 30 years before. Crazy stuff, right? So what we're trying to focus on is those types of things. So that report came out, and as you can expect, folks didn't like it. And they started doing oh, wait a minute, there's this report out of a group in Washington that said government workers make 6% less. So my response is pretty simple. Right, well, to get to that number, one, you have to actually look at Ohio data, which they didn't. But two, what they did to get there is they said, well, first of all, let's cut out half of the government workers who don't have their college degrees. And now we only have this many. And now let's cut out the 3.1 million Ohioans who don't have a college degree. And now let's just compare the ones that do. So let's compare 30% of government, private sector workers in Ohio to 50% of government workers in Ohio. But let's not ask the question of, do they actually need a degree, right? I mean, I don't care if the Starbucks barista has a PhD in philosophy. I'm not going to pay him more for my cup of coffee to get him to pour it. Right? So sometimes they don't need the degree, but they have the degree. And as you know, teachers, right, they have their master's and PhD. It doesn't impact classroom performance, but it's a requirement to drive salaries up. So they don't ask that question. And more importantly, we say, well, let's take the lawyer or the psychiatrist in government to private practice. And I want to sit down with that psychiatrist in government and say, okay, I want to unpack this a bit and understand something. Tell me what you had to do to build your practice when you first got into government. Right, you got your practice handed to you. What's your malpractice insurance running every year? Oh, you don't pay that. And what's your overhead for all your staff, your secretary and your assistants and oh, you don't have that either. There's this thing called risk in the private sector that they should get paid more because they take risks and they could lose it all. Whereas a state worker, you walk in, you get your practice, you get your job, and you walk out and you never have to do anything to earn it or keep it. So at any rate, that's the kind of stuff we're doing in Ohio to try to beat back this system. And what we've got now is we've got a big race in the governor's race. They've both taken tax hike off the table. The governor, who's a Democrat, has taken cutting compensation off the table, which leaves him cutting programs. And what's great about this is I love it when I get to debate the folks on the left on these things. I say, so let me get this right. We're going to kick the teeth of vulnerable populations, and I use that magic word because it's theirs. You're going to kick the teeth of vulnerable populations more so you can save 50,000 state workers who are your union-funded friends. That's what you're putting union-funded friends ahead of these poor Ohioans that have been beat to hell over the last 20 years, and especially the last 3 years during this recession. I'm glad to see you know where your priorities are, and they go apoplectic. Oh, you're trying to take health care away, and I say, yeah. So at that point, we've already won the debate. So that's what we're doing. We're having fun doing it, as you can see. But this stuff is going gangbusters. I feel like a drug dealer, and the drug is salary data. Because every time we put it up, we have like this massive spike. Like we have these people running into the street to get their hit. It's amazing. So at any rate, thank you.